Part 89. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 893. Under the eaves, two men were sitting on the wooden threshold of the living room door, smoking cigarettes. There were already cigarette butts under their feet. We really made a very stupid mistake, and this mistake almost sent me to the west yesterday, Fatty said, very unhappy. Hey, I experienced the feeling of sexual suffocation you mentioned before. Someone wants to refine us into corpse puppets, but when he sees us suddenly breaking free from his shackles, he plans to get rid of us completely. Subai blew out a smoke ring. Now our work has become more difficult. 1. Just like the listeners who came back from Foxconn wanted to search for us in this village, we also have to search for someone who is also hiding in this village. I can understand what that guy is thinking. Fatty shrugged in an exaggerated manner and said, think about it, the two gangsters who were wandering outside in the village were deceived by him and then slowly came under his control. Refining into a corpse puppet, while his plan was proceeding in an orderly manner, he suddenly woke up one morning and found that he had lost control of these two goals. What surprised him even more was that the two targets secretly killed a person at night, and then continued killing people the next day, and even dismembered the body. From this perspective, Bimax, how do you think he would feel? There was an error in the refining, and the corpse puppet has its own consciousness, Subai replied. Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered if we kept being our gangsters, but we started killing people, and more than one, and in that guy's eyes, he certainly didn't know who the listeners were, and he didn't know who the broadcaster was. From his perspective in the program, he realized that the two corpse puppets he was about to refine had escaped from his control and began to kill people according to his bloodthirsty instinct. At the same time, as a refiner, he instinctively felt that the two of us would definitely bite him back, so he is ready to attack us in advance and destroy us. The man's corpse transformation was just a warning, but because that guy was killed by a knife in his neck by Dabai, the corpse transformation didn't succeed and was cut off by us in time. But the guy who strangled him in the first place came out again last night and wanted to kill him. Revenge should be his second step. According to the script, the interpretation should be like this. If we kill an audience member, that audience member will turn into a supernatural being to take revenge on us under the intervention of the hidden guy. Haha, there is still a female deceased who has not come out, and I don't know what tricks she can play. The fat man subconsciously reached out and touched the talisman he put in his trouser pocket. A fierce light flashed in the corner of his eyes. Subai could understand the fat man, but he was pecked by the wild goose all day long. The real level of the fat man was equivalent to that of a real Taoist. Realm, but last night almost died at the hands of a kid. Naturally there was an anger in my heart that I couldn't swallow. Compared to the Foxconn audience, we are in the dark and they are in the light, but compared to that hidden guy, we are in the light and he is in the dark. I don't really like the feeling of having a pair of eyes secretly watching me from behind when I'm doing something. Let's find that person out first, otherwise the more people we kill, the more ways and opportunities he will have to sneak attack on us. I agree with this. It seems that we need to clarify our life experience again, at least reinvestigate what happened when we returned to the village. The fat man nodded. There is no need to worry about alerting the enemy. It would have been better for the snake to be frightened away, but in fact, that guy couldn't resist the will of the broadcast at all. He was not the powerful NPC we had experienced in the story world before, so even if he was frightened, he would probably only become more powerful. They just want us dead. The broadcast is supposed to lower his IQ for the sake of the plot. Dabai, please hold this talisman first. Don't go to a dark and cramped place when investigating. In broad daylight, most evil threats will be weakened to a certain extent, but you still have to be careful. Have you never eaten pork and seen pigs running? Subai took the talisman and pointed to the two statues behind them curiously. There's something wrong with these two things. There's something wrong. If you keep appearing in the killing field, it's equivalent to consecrating them in disguise. It doesn't matter. At least it's hard for the little devil to get close to it. After saying that, the fat man stood up and said, I'll go to the clinic in the village first to see if I can steal some medicine. How's the injury on your leg? It's a lot of fat and can withstand bullets. It's okay. The fat man waved his hands and walked out of the house. Sudbai sat for a while longer, then got up, locked the door and walked out. Just as he reached the small square at the entrance of the village, Sudbai suddenly stopped. He had a special premonition. At that moment, he did not continue to inquire about the news but ran directly back to House 1. After arriving home, Sudbai looked at the door of his house, which was still locked. However, Sudbai quickly went around and saw that the iron wire tied to the small door of the shed set up behind the house was obviously opened. Licking his lips, Sudbai sent a text message to the fat man, then he took a deep breath, opened the small door at an extremely fast speed and rushed in. When he was in audience, Sudbai was the one who walked close to fight, so he knew clearly that he could never give those people time to prepare. Just like when a warrior faces a magician, once the magician is approached by the warrior, it means tragedy, and once the magician successfully distances himself from the warrior, then the warrior was probably killed by a series of magic spells before he even touched the magician with his sword. At the same time, the spring knife Hukai used yesterday was also held in Sudbai's hand, with the handle attached to his wrist, ready to stab out at any time. Everything was as usual in the living room. Sudbai first went to his bedroom, which was as usual, and then went to Fatty's bedroom. There was still nothing strange, but Sudbai knew that he had locked the small door at the back with wire yesterday, and he and Fatty were alone. Now in the story world, I am not careless enough to forget to lock the door. Could it be that the guy came in and then left in such a short period of time? Sudbai's eyes fell on the water tank in the living room. He had soaked there before when he entered the story world. However, the water tank had been cleaned by himself and Fatty. It had a wooden lid on it and there was no water in it. Approaching the water tank, Sudbai stretched out his hand and opened the lid of the wooden board. The water tank was empty, but at this moment, a strange friction sound suddenly came from above Sudbai. Sudbai did not raise his head first, but his whole body can fall backwards. Buzz. A figure fell down, and he seemed to be holding something sharp in his hand, but Sudbai couldn't see it clearly amid the lightning and flint. When Sudbai stood up again, he saw that there was no figure in front of him again, and the other party disappeared again. Sudbai looked around vigilantly. He knew clearly that the other party had not left. The other party was probably using a blind trick to confuse him. This kind of trick he had also used before, such as condensing the evil spirit of the zombies into a mirror and using the refraction of light to bend him. Stealth, and the opponent definitely couldn't do that. He probably used some low-level concealment method, similar to an advanced magic show. It's a pity that the fat man wanted to make a few bottles of cow's tears yesterday, but some special materials could not be found for the time being. Otherwise, after smearing the eyes with special cow's tears and starting the underworld, these deceptions would not be able to fool him. A dark wind came from behind Sudbai. Sudbai did not move. When the other party seemed to be close to him, another figure suddenly appeared diagonally to his side. The figure obviously seemed a little hesitant, because he saw that Sudbai was not affected by his strategy of attacking in the east and attacking in the west, so when the real body was about to launch a surprise attack according to the plan, he became a little hesitant and not so decisive. The other party was wearing a black robe, and his face was completely covered, so his true appearance could not be seen clearly. Sudbai, on the other hand, slammed into him and felt a burning pain in his arm. He must have been cut by the sharp weapon in the opponent's hand, but Sudbai didn't care about it at all. When he got close to the opponent's body, he stabbed directly with the switchblade. Passed. Once, twice, 3 times. Because of his bloodline, Subai's fighting instinct often relied on exchanging injuries for injuries. In fact, it was a posture that was so stunned that he was afraid of losing his life. When Subai felt that his hand was starting to, when you feel a warm feeling, you realize that the other person has really been hit hard by you. Suddenly, the opponent raised his knees, trying to break away from Subai and his close body. However, although his strength was gone, Subai's fighting consciousness was still there, and the opponent was not strong enough to ignore Subai. Therefore, Subai directly twisted his body and leaned over, taking advantage of the opponent's unstable center of gravity when raising his knees to pin the opponent under him. However, at this moment, a strong force suddenly came from the other party, and Subai was thrown away. Subai, who hit the wall, felt a tightness in his chest, and 10,000 hums rushing through his heart. If you had this power, why didn't you light it up earlier and pretend to be weak? But soon Subai realized that he had thought wrong. The other party staggered to his feet and ran back without looking back, as if he had been seriously injured. However, Subai struggled to stand up and chase after him but felt a headache in his head. Feeling dizzy, he reached out and touched the back of his head and saw that his palms were covered in blood. Plop! Subai knelt on the ground on one knee. Could it be that you got hit and got a concussion? Damn it, how can you play in this story world if you have a concussion? Squeak! At this moment, the door to the living room next to Subai was unlocked from the outside and pushed open. The fat man rushed in. The first thing he saw was Subai kneeling on the ground with one knee. Bimax, the back of your head is covered in blood. Why the hell did you go through the front door? After Subai cursed the sentence, he felt that he completely lost consciousness and fainted. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 894. When Subai woke up, it was already evening. Subai subconsciously reached out and touched the back of his head and found that it had been bandaged. The fat man walked in at this time, holding a bowl of egg-fried rice. Eat, I wanted to cook porridge for you, but I'm afraid I won't have enough energy if I don't eat. I've checked you out, and you have some mild concussion symptoms, but it shouldn't be a big problem, at least in the short term. The fat man stood beside Subai's bed. He sat down and sighed. Subai took the bowl and chopsticks. Although he had no appetite now, eating was necessary for this body. I didn't catch up with that guy, the fat man said with some embarrassment. The blame was indeed on him. If he had used his brain a little more and came in through the back door, he might have blocked the person directly. As a result, he waited until when he came in through the front door and chased him out through the back door, the figure disappeared. Seeing Dabai on the bed fighting with that guy and getting bruised, Fatty felt really sorry. That guy is injured. Subai quickly finished the meal and put it next to him. But I couldn't see his face clearly, and I couldn't even tell the difference between male and female. When I fought with him, his body shape was different from mine. My eyes were always a little blurry. It should be a low-grade evil weapon that affects people's sanity, or maybe it's not even low-grade. It's normal for us to be affected in our current state, but what exactly is he going to do when he comes back? The fat man obviously said there are still some things I don't understand. I guess it's out of curiosity, Subai said. The two corpse puppets under my control suddenly gained their own consciousness. If it were you, you would also want to know what these two people were secretly doing in the house. Or should we recuperate for 2 days? Fatty gritted his teeth. I'll try to get more materials and configure our equipment, otherwise we'll be really at a disadvantage. The audience probably won't give us time and opportunity to recover and prepare. Subai finished the meal quickly and said. No one can look down on me now. I'm so numb. This story world is so frustrating. The more you feel aggrieved, maybe the more interesting the broadcast will be. Subai closed his eyes, as if digesting and thinking, clean the house and wipe off all the blood stains. Don't let those listeners find you suspicious. Clue. It's been taken care of. The injury on your arm and the injury on your head are actually not very obvious. No one can see it with clothes and a hat. The fat man smiled. This is a blessing in misfortune. That woman didn't even cut my leg deep even once before, otherwise if we two limped out, even a fool would know something was wrong with us. At this time, there was a sudden noise outside, and a vague siren was heard. Subai and Fatty immediately looked at each other. Fatty immediately came to the window and looked out. Then he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "They are not here for us." When the fat man turned around, he saw that Subai had already gotten out of bed. "Are you sure you don't need any more rest?" "No need, it's not that expensive," Subai said. "Let's go out and see what's going on. I don't think it's our business that has been exposed." After putting on clothes and a hat, Subai and Fatty walked out of the house together. The two of them were holding cigarettes in their mouths and walking casually toward the crowd, as if they were just here to watch the fun. 3 police cars and nearly 10 policemen came, which meant that the matter was not trivial. The police cars were parked in front of the supermarket, and a blockade was also pulled at the entrance of the supermarket. The onlookers kept looking outside the blockade. There were even many construction site workers from the village wearing safety helmets and coming over to watch the fun. "It's really the nature of the Chinese people to watch the excitement," the fat man muttered. "You've never been abroad, but it's almost the same," Subai joked. The 120 car came quickly, and several medical staff carried a stretcher in. After a while, a person came out on the stretcher, and she turned out to be the supermarket proprietress. Subai remembered that this boss lady was a woman with a big mouth. She had given him a lot of information during the chat with him, but now she could no longer speak. At such a close distance, even if she had no mental perception, Subai and Fatty could also rely on their own experience to tell at a glance that the woman on the stretcher was already dead. There are 2 murderers in the village, and they are both standing here now, but the problem is that they did not kill anyone, but now someone has died, and it should not be a normal death, otherwise so many police would not have come. This makes Fatty and Subai feel different. The feeling of being robbed of business by others. The fat man held a cigarette in his pocket and ran out to brag about the news with several nearby merchants. Subai sat down in the flower garden where he played chess yesterday. After a while, the fat man came back and said with a frown, "It was a murder." Several nearby merchants said they heard a scream from the supermarket. When someone went in to check, they found that the female boss was already lying on the ground motionless. "Where is the wound?" Subai asked. "I don't know about that." "Who among them would dare to check the body at that time?" The fat man smiled helplessly. Subai suddenly lowered his head slightly and threw another cigarette to the fat man. The two of them had one cigarette in their mouths and one in their ears. "Those listeners are behind you." When the fat man heard the words, he immediately understood and calmly turned his body to the side, found a perspective from which he could observe the other side and lay on the tree beside the flower bed. There are 6 people over there who are obviously in a group. These 6 people can basically be concluded to be the audience. You want to say that these 6 young people work together at Foxconn, so they come back to the village to watch the fun and they also make appointments with each other. Who would believe it? However, one of them, a boy with a flat head, walked over deliberately, handed the fat man a cigarette, and then handed Subai a cigarette, saying, "Brother, what happened?" This was obviously the group of listeners who were assigned to inquire about the information. The fact that they chose the 2 of them to inquire about the information almost meant that they did not put them in the first order of the murderers' targets. Perhaps, they were still as deep as that Hukai. Influenced by the inherent thinking of starting a case in the real world. Or is it that this guy came here deliberately to find an excuse to contact the 2 of them? But looking at the Tianjin accent that this guy can't hide when he opens his mouth, it's unlikely, right? This is Yunnan. You, a native of Yunnan, actually speak with a Tianjin accent. Does that make sense? I don't know. The boss's wife just had an accident and was carried into an ambulance. I just don't know if the problem is serious. Alas, the boss's wife is still in good shape. Although she has given birth to a child, her frame is big and the place is also big. The fat man was more dedicated, and he started to speak in an authentic local accent, and the little crew cut had to pretend to cooperate with the fat man. Afterwards, Xiaopingtu stood up and went to share information with those people. Cabby, the fat man muttered and smiled to himself. Silence. Subai reminded, that guy was specifically pointed to us by the woman in the red short-sleeved group to find out information. The fat man was shocked and said, on purpose. In a team, there will definitely be pig teammates, but it is unlikely that they will all be pig teammates. The woman with red short sleeves obviously occupies a leadership position in this group. Let her be the next target, Subai said helplessly. The blame is on our gangster status, it's really eye-catching. The fat man nodded slightly in agreement. This was also equivalent to playing a killing game. Sometimes, the most skillful person on the opposite side was killed first, and the remaining pig teammates on the opposite side were easily deceived. Who is in the family of this female boss? Subai asked. Obviously, this matter had nothing to do with the fat man and had nothing to do with the audience. However, the female boss died strangely. In this village, there are only 3 groups with the qualifications and motives to kill. 2 groups have been eliminated, and the remaining group is the biggest suspect. But that man had just been stabbed several times by himself today, and he was probably treating his wounds at the moment. How could he suddenly come out to kill someone? Divorced. She and her father usually go to the supermarket. Well, they don't have children, the fat man replied. Her father just fainted from crying. We have to find an opportunity to get close to the body, otherwise we won't be able to tell whether the ambulance is sent to the county hospital, right? Let's go with it. Okay, I'm going to call a taxi now. Don't worry, those audience members are probably going too. Let's walk behind them. If we walk in front, we will be easily exposed, Subai said. I'm going back to get some stuff, and I'll take the 2 bloody statues with me as well. Do you want to go with me? I'll wait for you here. Subai still glanced at the woman over there from time to time. Well, I'll be right over. Seeing that there were so many people here, the fat man probably wouldn't be in any danger here, so he immediately ran towards home without hesitation. Subai was sitting beside the flower garden, looking leisurely. After squinting for a while, Subai felt that there was someone sitting next to him, and there was a body smell coming from that person. Subai didn't believe that such a smell could come from the fat guy. It's quite cool here, the woman said. Subai opened his eyes and saw the woman in red short sleeves sitting next to him. It's cooler if you don't wear clothes. Haha, the woman smiled noncommittally, but then added, I'm so scared today. I just talked to the landlady this morning and bought something from her. Who would have thought that she would be dead now? This is fate. Some people deserve to be rich, and some people deserve to die early. Hey, I've seen through it a long time ago, Subai responded as if nothing had happened. She was doubting herself, Subai was sure of this, but she was still testing herself, which meant that she was still just doubting and had no definite evidence. Brother, why are you still wearing a hat on such a hot day? It's so hot. As she said that, the woman reached out to grab Subai's hat. Subai did not dodge, but when the woman reached for his hat, his hand also reached for the woman's chest. You're wearing this on such a hot day, and yours is so big, it's so weird. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 895. The woman in red short sleeves did not flinch at all because of Subai's outstretched hands. Yes, for a listener who is in the world of the story, there is nothing that cannot be given up, and there is nothing that cannot be let go. Yes, compared to confirming the clues, the fact that he was attacked in the chest seems a bit insignificant. Moreover, 3 of her fellow listeners who entered the world of the story had died and disappeared before, which gave her an invisible sense of crisis. But Sudbai seemed very calm, at least on the surface. He had many explanations for the wound on the back of his head, but it was foreseeable that once the other party discovered the wound on his head, he would definitely pay more attention to himself. By the way, the fat man who is with him will naturally fall under suspicion. Guys like Hukai who are experienced are only a minority among the minority. In fact, Sudbai was already hesitating in his mind whether to take out a switchblade and stab the woman to death, and then escape. However, according to the default requirements of the story world, he could not leave the village too far unless he went out to sell meat. Otherwise, you still have to stay within the village. Once you kill someone in public, even if you can escape from here, you probably won't be able to escape the blanket search by the police and the masses. Even if you escape from prison and escape into the mountains and forests, you will be used people's tactics after searching, how long can I hide in the woods in the village? However, something happened in this flash of lightning. This matter can be said to be more difficult in terms of subsequent events, but at least for now, it has indeed helped Sudbai resolve a very embarrassing crisis. That was the ambulance that had just driven away. At this moment, it drove back again, and even after entering the village, it continued to speed unabated and ran rampant. The people who were watching and chatting around immediately screamed and retreated, but the ambulance actually went straight to the village. He rushed towards the flower bed where Sudbai and the red short-sleeved woman were sitting. If Sudbai continues to attack his breasts and the woman continues to lift Sudbai's hat at this time, then the two of them will soon turn into a meat sauce that stays together and flies together. At the critical moment, the fierceness belonging to the audience showed up. The woman grabbed Sudbai's collar and pulled it down. With this force, the woman jumped up and jumped towards the other side of the flower garden. Sudbai originally thought about doing a reverse buckle when the woman pulled his collar, but gave up. When the woman turned over and jumped over the flower bed, the ambulance had already arrived in front of him. Sudbai could only use his eyes to roughly he glanced at the height and chassis of the ambulance, and then he curled up on the flower bed pretending to be shivering. Boom! The ambulance crashed over. Because the floor bead was as high as a layer of cement tiles, the car didn't run over her. However, Sudbai, who was curled up and holding his head, was cut by the scattered glass fragments after the car hit. Everyone was worried about Sudbai at first. Of course, this worry can actually be explained as a kind of curiosity. They were curious about whether the gangster in this village was directly killed. However, looking at Sudbai who was still lying there and shivering, it was obvious that he had not recovered. Sudbai came, and although the villagers who were watching said, "Fortunately, he's fine," they actually felt a little lonely. Why didn't this turtle grandson survive for everyone to watch? Just as a Western king who was guillotined during the Great Revolution once said to a revolutionary beside him, "The masses below are cheering, not for my death." In fact, if it were you who were guillotined, they would also cheers. There were still police officers around who hadn't left. When they saw something like this, the police immediately came over to check on the ambulance. A policeman walked up to Sudbai, who was still shivering, stretched out his hand, patted him, and asked, "Is everything okay?" Sudbai was so frightened that he trembled again. He slowly raised his head and touched his body. He found that he still had all his hair and tail. He felt like he was surviving a disaster. Then, with the help of the policeman, he walked to a nearby merchant. "Get ready to rest there. As for checking the injuries, well, let's forget about it for now. The ambulance was in trouble and we don't know what the specific situation is inside. Sister Chu, that guy is so cowardly, he can't be the murderer, right? the little crewneck next to the red short-sleeved woman asked in a low voice, "The murderer should be buried very secretly." Yes, if a robbery or murder is discovered in an area, the probability of asking local gangsters to find out who the murderer is actually quite high, but the story world of broadcasting is similar to the communication method of novels or TV dramas, where the murderer is not hidden. It felt like a failure not to reveal something unexpected. The red short-sleeved woman who was called Sister Chu carefully recalled Subai's reaction before. Without saying anything else, her eyes began to stare at the ambulance, and at the same time she said to the people around her, "Don't disperse, everyone, be careful of the murderer fishing in troubled waters to sneak attack on us." After hearing this, everyone immediately gathered closer. Dabai, what happened to you?" The fat man came over with a snakeskin bag in his hand and saw Subai sitting in front of a fertilizer store with scratches all over his body. "I was so careless. I almost died because of my carelessness." Subai took out his cigarette and found that the cigarette box had been crushed by himself and the cigarettes inside were half bent. The fat man handed over a cigarette, and then asked in a low voice, "What happened to the ambulance?" "Something must have happened. Use your little brain. A dead person was carried into an ambulance. Then something suddenly happened to the ambulance. And I have been sitting here without seeing the doctors, nurses or even the driver inside. When we get out of the ambulance, what do you think will happen?" "Zombie transformation." Fatty scratched his head. "It's a standard horror movie routine." "It's hard to say, but it should be close. There are weird things in this village, Fatty. There are really weird things in this village," Subai repeated. "Why do I feel like this story world has just begun?" "It's just the beginning." The fat man obviously couldn't understand Subai's thinking. Of course, this may be because Subai had been in contact with the broadcast consciousness, so his feelings and thoughts about the story world were naturally different from other listeners. "Let's take a look first. I always feel uneasy in my heart." Subai looked at the bag that the fat man brought over. "We were just going to go to the hospital with the ambulance to check the situation." The audience obviously had the same plan. "But did you see the result? The ambulance came back by itself." "You mean you don't want us to leave the village completely?" Fatty also figured out something. "I don't know. Keep looking. If nothing special appears in the ambulance, then this is a possibility." Soon, the police officers went to search for the ambulance, but they just came down with frowns and suspicion on their faces. "It seems like there are no dead people in the ambulance," Fatty analyzed. "Yes, those police officers are not Oscar winners. If there were corpses in the ambulance, they would not have this expression." At this time, the crowd of onlookers began to increase. The villagers who had dispersed as the ambulance left came back. Many workers from nearby construction sites who had finished get off work and were resting in the dormitories of the construction site also gathered in twos and threes. Seeing so many people, Subai suddenly thought of a possibility in his mind and said, "Fat man, do you still remember our meet?" "Remember, what happened?" "Tell me, if no one in the village can go out, what price can our ostrich meat be sold for?" Everyone spread out, spread out. A policeman started to evacuate the crowd with a loudspeaker, and the police set up a barrier near the ambulance as they had done before at the murder scene. If we follow this pace, from now on, these policemen should not be able to contact their bureau. All external communication equipment in this village will have failed at this time, the network will also be interrupted, and the entire village will be plunged into chaos. In a state of isolation, Subai said slowly. When the fat man heard this, he immediately took out his mobile phone and took a look. There is really no signal. You are so numb. Dabai, I found that your mouth is really open recently. You fooled Boss Liang in this story this time several times in the world. God's predictions are ridiculously accurate. Subai glanced at the fat man angrily and said, "It can only be a coincidence that you fooled Boss Liang. I don't know why the radio didn't let him get the train ticket, but it's most likely because the radio felt that the battlefield over there was enough. It doesn't matter if there is one missing Boss Liang, a guy who is extremely cowardly. This time in the story world, I just put myself into the position and perspective of the broadcast when thinking. Also, now I somewhat understand why the boss lady died. What? Keep talking. The fat man looked at Dabai as if he were looking at a prophet. The cause of her death was like a catalyst. After 3 people died in a row, the audience over there began to unite and have a leader, and began to become cautious. Because of our injuries and foreseeable dangers, we are also preparing to slowly. The ground became cautious. The mysterious man who was originally arranged to be the catalyst was stabbed a few times by me. Although he was not dead, he must have only half a life left and I don't know where he is lingering. As you can imagine, this plot has fallen into a dead end again and turned into a bowl of boiled water. The purpose of broadcasting this time is purely to play the story world made for consumption. Although the power level of this world is low, there are actually many plot bugs in it. Because there is no main plot that allows the audience to compete with each other and improve, similar to raising goo, many places are promoted to promote the plot. The proprietress died, which attracted an ambulance and the police. The ambulance went out first, but came back in an accident. This told us that the village was about to be closed, and this wave of police, if my guess is correct, the one who led these police, they are definitely advanced elements who love the party and the country, because the dozen or so policemen are armed with guns. They will become the most powerful force in the village after the isolation, maintaining the social order in the village that is about to collapse. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 896. Sure enough, Fatty soon saw a few policemen over there who seemed to be calling constantly on their mobile phones. They must have lost contact with the station. Many nearby villagers also complained that their mobile phones had no signal, and some people nearby were talking. Is there something wrong with one of the signal base stations next to the village? But when some merchants found that the landlines in their stores could not make calls, the situation began to buzz out of control. There are many things that once you get used to them, once you lose them, you will feel inexplicably uncomfortable. For example, people living in cities used to complain that there were cameras everywhere, but suddenly if you are placed in a remote place without cameras, you will suddenly feel no sense of security at all. In fact, going back 30 or 40 years to the village, it is unknown whether there was even a phone call from the village committee. At that time, the villagers basically had no contact with the outside world, but now, there is suddenly no signal and all external communications are blocked. Paralyzed, this anxiety slowly boils to a boil. A policeman got into the police car. He was probably planning to drive back to the county. Since the communication was interrupted, he could only rely on manual communication. The remaining about 10 police officers sat down nearby, and everyone was waiting. The leading police officer was about 40 years old, with a Chinese character face, and looked very majestic. He sat there, and his men were all waiting. They all sat upright, and the police maintained their dignity very well. At this moment, Subai suddenly thought of Chuzhou, but he just thought about it casually. Then, Subai and Fatty turned around to go home. The number of people gathered here to watch the fun began to decrease. It seems a bit too eye-catching here. However, when Subai and Fatty were walking along the cement road to the door of their home, suddenly a police car rushed over from the front. Damn it, the car that left from the entrance of the village actually came back from the end of the village. The fat man actually made some preparations in his mind. It was reasonable that the car would come back, but he did not dare to neglect it. Knowing that Subai was injured, he immediately grabbed Subai and the two of them moved sideways to avoid the police car. He drove forward on his own, but there was a turnoff in front of him. The car drove directly into someone's yard without turning the corner, knocking down the wall of that person's yard. Go home and look through the window, Subai said. The The two of them returned home and made some noodles first. The fat man also specially beat a few eggs into it, and then said helplessly, "If I had known I had bought some meat, I haven't seen much meat in the past few days. Isn't there a big jar of marinated ostrich meat at home? You can take some and put it in the noodles. Damn it, Dabai, it's time to eat. Can you stop being so disgusting?" The two of them sat by the window with a bench, eating noodles while looking outside. The rest of the police came quickly, and then a group of villagers gathered nearby, and the audience members were also in the crowd. "Is there chaos?" the fat man said after taking a sip. "Dabai, why don't we take advantage of the current panic and kill one more person tonight?" "Who to kill?" Subai shook his head. "Those 6 audience members are now completely together and will hardly act alone, unless you want to have a 2 vs 6, and the remaining 10 policemen next to them are not vegetarians either." "Yes, we can actually think of ways to steal a gun now." "Steal the gun?" Fatty said a little surprised. "What if I completely pissed off the police?" "So I said before that this police officer should be the type who loves the party, the country, and is loyal to his duties. Otherwise, if you let a bad policeman control such a force in this isolated village, people will be in a state of collective despair. It's really hard to say what kind of chaos and ugliness will break out next, and maybe this is not what the broadcasters want to see. This is only the first day. It's probably still early to achieve that effect. I've seen several movies about isolation before. In the first few days, people basically loved each other and helped each other. After a few days, then this kind of despair will swallow up people's reason, because the first thing this kind of desperate environment destroys is people's previous 3 views. Call. The fat man drank the last mouthful of noodle soup, breathed a long sigh of relief, and said, "Babai, have you ever thought that once this chaotic order is established, it will be more difficult for us to fish in troubled waters? After we start killing, it may be easier to kill the first person, but it will be difficult to kill the second person, because once the person is dead, it is completely possible to rely on these policemen and the guns in their hands to create a new order. They can even gather all the villagers and workers in one place and conduct forced management in a manner similar to the army, hoping to wait for rescue from the outside safely. All this is just your guess, isn't it?" the fat man said suddenly. "Oh, what do you think?" Subai asked. "No matter how possessed the policeman is by Jesus, he can only control himself. The policeman under him cannot control him. I think it will be difficult for him to do that. Moreover, I still recommend taking advantage of the opportunity before killing him tonight. It would be a great loss for a person not to take advantage of this opportunity." Subai hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay." After all, he and Fatty were partners, not subordinates, and Subai didn't think that his mind was really clearer and more far-sighted than Fatty's. In fact, Fatty was very funny at Lao Fang's house. There is also a reputation as a social butterfly in the circle, but this guy is the most powerful one among the 4 because he is ruthless and ruthless. In other words, he is very good at taking advantage of the fire. Besides, Dabai, haven't you noticed that if you kill someone now, as long as the body is properly disposed of, everyone, including the police, except for the few babies in the audience, will only think that the person wants to leave the village on his own, so that leads to if they go missing, they won't think that people in the village are killing people." The fat man became more and more enthusiastic as he spoke. He immediately stood up and found a spittoon from his room. When the fat man came towards Subai with the spittoon, Subai smelled clearly. There was a fishy smell. "Black dog blood?" Subai asked. "My enemy, when you were unconscious, I went to tinker with the materials. I even found cinnabar. I also stole a black dog from the house in front and killed it. The fat man is now fully equipped. Even if he doesn't have magic power, he can do it." "Dead man," the fat man smiled confidently at Subai, "don't worry, I didn't do it myself this time. That little crew cut, remember. I stuffed an evil talisman I drew yesterday into the back pocket of his jeans. Did you release it when he was asking us for information? Subai said a little surprised. I asked you what you were doing so close to him at that time. I thought you had rekindled your old interests. Dabai, if you mention that again, believe it or not, fatty, I will die with you right now, the fat man pointed at Subai and said. Subai waved his hand, but still said a little uncertainly, Taoist magic is so awesome. Now that you have no magic power, you can still kill people from a distance. It can't kill people, Fatty said very straightforwardly, but it can make him sick, such as making him feel dizzy and uncomfortable. If I do this, I can scare them. Now they are gathered together. How can we find an opportunity to do it? Moreover, this evil spell requires my lifespan as a condition, and my lifespan will be lost in at least 5 years. Lifespan does not mean much to Subai and Fatty now. After leaving this story world, Fatty can easily make up for the loss of lifespan. Moreover, if he cannot wait until the next train arrives, he will not live for 2 years. Wait a minute, you mean, you do it here, and then I have to go out and kill people myself? Nonsense, Mr. Fatty, if I can be so cunning as to kill someone from afar, what nonsense will the audience on the other side be? Dabai, you are just ambushing them on their way back. I am going to cast a spell now. He will definitely fall asleep at night. He's starting to lose his mind. If you go in and kill him with a knife, they can't all sleep under the same roof. At most, they can find an excuse to live in the same house. I think we can wait and see. I can't wait any longer. God knows when this guy touched his butt pocket and found the talisman. The fat man thought for a moment and said, let's do this, Dabai. I'll try to see if I can possess him while casting the spell. If you can control his consciousness, you will be able to kill easily and become corrupted, but I don't know if I can do it. Is there such a saucy operation? Subai was a little dumbfounded. It doesn't matter if I waste 5 more years of my life. The fat man looked indifferent. Is there going to be an accident? Subai said worriedly. You know there is a guy who knows magic hidden in this village. That's not the case. Didn't that guy get stabbed a few times by you? He's probably half dead now. If he attacks me at this time, aren't you afraid of dying? The fat man still said confidently, it's okay. I'll wait for him to curse me first. By the way, Dabai, if something goes wrong with me later, I say just in case something goes wrong with me, just get some black dog blood and sprinkle it on my head. After saying that, the fat man started to draw the talisman with cinnabar, and then took out the talisman drawn yesterday with human blood and charcoal. The 2 talismans were put together and spontaneously ignited. Then the fat man put the talisman paper into a water bowl, and then without hesitation he drank the night's water, then sat cross-legged and began to recite the incantation. Subai stood aside and watched. But at this moment, Subai suddenly felt that the temperature around him was a little low, and a feeling of drowsiness suddenly came over him. This feeling was very familiar, but it was not good. The guy who knew magic did not take action, but the souls of the dead were not killed that night. He's back again, and he still wants to seek revenge on Fatty. Subai immediately picked up the statue of Grandpa Mao and the statue of Guanyin on the table, but when the 2 statues came close to the fat man suddenly started to tremble. Subai then realized that the fat man seemed to be using evil magic too. Yeah. The fat man suddenly opened his eyes, stood up, then pushed Subai away, moved the 2 statues that Subai placed in front of him, and then made preparations to run out of the house. Subai hurriedly reached out to catch him, but who knew that the fat man was so strong at this time that he broke free from Subai's hand and rushed out of the house. There were many police officers and villagers outside, surrounding the police car that came back but was empty. Who knew that the door of a nearby house was suddenly pushed open, and a big fat man jumped out, pinched orchid fingers with both hands, and started dancing on his toes. and started singing at the top of his lungs. Susan left Hongdong County and came to the street. I felt miserable before I said anything. The gentleman who passed by listened to my words. Who will go to Nanjing to pass the message to my Sanlang? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 897. In the isolated village, the fat man's high-pitched duck voice sang loudly with a female voice. In this evening, it seemed so sad. It was like a madman who appeared before the beginning of a horror movie, with a kind of drunkenness that made everyone drunk. To wake up alone means to do some crazy words and bizarre actions. When the protagonist and supporting characters think that he is a fool, in the end, everyone will realize that this madman may be the one who really sees through it before they die. Subai knew that he seemed to be a pig teammate for a time, but in fact he had no other choice at the time. After all, if he didn't take action, if the fat man was possessed by the resentful spirit again, he would probably not sing at the top of his lungs. Susan, instead he hit his head against the wall and died. Although the fat man was possessed by some inexplicable ghost in the end, fortunately, the ghost was quite elegant. Under this situation, Subai didn't rush out to find Fatty, so he let Fatty perform outside for a while. He first collected the props used by Fatty in the house and made sure nothing unusual would be discovered before running away. Out of the living room. At this time, a lot of people gathered around the fat man. 2 policemen tried to walk over and subdue the fat man, but the potential of the body of the ghost-possessed person was stimulated, and the fat man was so big, it's hard to control. Whether it is a Taoist disciple, a ghost cultivator, or a shaman from the northeast who performs great dances, they actually have a method similar to inviting ghosts to take over their bodies. In fact, it is to stimulate their own potential. Of course, this sequelae is also very serious. A man in the audience wearing a red peaked cap came out at this time, grabbed the fat man's chin, and then slapped the fat man on the chest 3 times. Subai, who was standing behind the crowd, looked at this scene. Yining, this guy is using a method to fight zombies. Ask Subai why he knew. Nonsense, Subai himself is a zombie, so he naturally knows the structure and weaknesses of the zombie's body very well. In general, the evil spirit of zombies is actually gathered in the throat, which is commonly known as one mouthful of resentment can't be swallowed. The evil spirit of a dead person or a corpse buried in a vicious hole often slowly accumulates in the throat, and then to a certain point. When the opportunity comes, the evil spirit surges up into the brain and activates the dead brain in another way, thus becoming a brand new life, a zombie. The reason why Hukai failed to become a zombie before was because Subai's severe injury when he killed him was on his neck, which was equivalent to breaking the zombie's seal. In fact, to be more realistic, zombies also have their own physiological structure. After all, there is a huge difference between physical creatures and ghosts with soul bodies. And the method that the peaked cap just used was to pinch the jaw first, which was regarded as resisting the evil spirit, and then slap the chest 3 times in a row. The strength and direction of these 3 blows were completely different. It was equivalent to stopping the source and then continuously beating away the resentment. Scattering, this is a standard action for dealing with zombies, but here it actually has an excellent effect on dealing with a fat man possessed by a ghost. Sure enough, the fat man opened his mouth and exhaled a breath of turbid air. His eyes also showed a clear color. Then the fat man's chest rose and fell, as if he was about to vomit. The fat man immediately bent down and began to retching. Just spit out the dirty stuff. The peaked hat reached out and patted the fat man on the back. The fat man waved his hand. I can't spit it out, my stomach feels so bad, but I'm much more awake than before. Yes, how dare the fat man vomit? If he vomits it out, the talisman water he swallowed before will come out, and won't it be directly exposed by then? The fat man was a fat man after all, and he reacted very quickly as he had just regained his consciousness. Besides, Subai could tell that something was unusual when he was standing nearby. As a Taoist priest, the fat man certainly knew that the audience in front of him had special abilities. Brother, are you okay? You really scared me to death just now. What's going on in the village today? Things keep happening. Subai hurried out at this time to pull the fat man over. Get more rest, the peaked hat warned, and then walked back to the red short-sleeved woman, exchanging something in a low voice. Everyone, be quiet, everyone, be quiet. Something has happened in the village now. I hope everyone will stay quiet and don't cause chaos. We will wait until we contact the higher UPS before making plans. You must know that evil will not prevail against good. I promise. Zhang is a man born under the red flag, and he doesn't believe that ghosts and monsters can make big waves. Subai helped the fat man back into the house, and those people seemed to ignore them. After all, compared with the safety of the village, everyone could clearly tell whether a person who had just been possessed by an evil spirit was more serious or less serious. As soon as the door was closed, the fat man immediately cursed in a low voice, Dabai, you almost cheated me to death. You insisted on playing with fire. The ghost you strangled to death just now is coming to take revenge on you. Can I watch him get on top of you? Subai retorted. Hearing this, the fat man was speechless, but there was a fleeting look of sternness in his eyes. Of course, this sternness was not directed at Subai, but at that ghost. The fat man has no guilt for killing someone. That guy is the audience, and the theme of this story world is the fight and treatment of the audience. If you don't kill him, he will kill him. Everyone's identity is naturally opposed, but the fat man is angry with that guy. After being killed by me, he turned into a ghost and came to take revenge on me twice in a row. I couldn't bear it. Just when Subai helped the fat man sit down and poured him a glass of water, the living room door was suddenly pushed open, and Officer Su walked in, followed by some police officers and the peaked cap. Officer Su reached out and touched the fat man's forehead, comforted him with concern, and then asked Subai to help the fat man go back to the bedroom to rest. Then he held a meeting in the living room of Subai's house. The behavior of the peaked cap just now also fell in the eyes of Officer Su. Although there are some things that cannot be touched in principle, such as if this place is really haunted or something, the things that happened before him and the fact that the village was inexplicably closed made the man who just kept saying so, Officer Su, who was talking about the red flag, was also a little moved. In addition to the peaked cap, Officer Su was accompanied by several cadres including the village party secretary. Everyone gathered together to hold the total. Subai listened for a while at the door of the bedroom and found that they were studying how to deal with this supernatural scientific phenomenon. The fat man was lying on the bed, and whispered helplessly, "What kind of luck is this, that we actually use our place as a combat base? Dabai, thank you for cleaning up the house first. That peaked cap is not simple. Oh, it's really not easy. He was very familiar with several of the moves he made to hit me. This kind of thing can't be achieved by strengthening Wadian. It should be something he had before he became an audience." Taoist mountain mover, I heard, have you passed? Fatty asked. You think that's what that peaked cap is for? It should be that the method of fighting zombies is the same as that of Taoist Banshan, the four major sects of tomb robbers, Mojin Xiao Ei, Fakao Tianguan, Banshan Taoist, Xiling Lishi, and Mojin Xiao Ei over the years. The hype is very hot, and not many people know about the other three. Taoist Banshan likes to dress up as a wild Taoist priest. He is responsible for finding tombs and contacting nearby underground forces to rob the tombs. I also met Fatty in Sichuan and invited Fatty to go with him, but Fatty refused. Although I was possessed by an unknown kid just now, my consciousness was still there, but my body was out of control. When he hit me, I felt it very clearly. It was Taoist Banshan. It's unmistakable. We whether it was good luck or something else, the 3 people we killed at the beginning were the weakest, and the remaining few who were awesome didn't die. Why didn't he tell that dead soul directly? At this point, Subai fell silent and glanced around. The fat man smiled and said, "Don't panic, the dead soul only has a causal relationship with us. He can't affect other people at all, let alone report the news to several of his partners. This is what the Taoist who moved mountains did. There is no way to see him, and besides, Taoists who move mountains are all wild men wearing Taoist skins. Technically speaking, they are much worse than Mojin Xiao Ei and Fakao Tianguan who can read Feng Shui to determine acupuncture points." "Someone is coming." Subai, who had been standing next to the bedroom door, winked at the fat man. Immediately, there was a knock on the door, and Subai opened the door. It was the peaked cap. The peaked cap was not tall and looked frail, but the twinkling light in his eyes gave people a very sharp feeling. Of course, he is of course considered a first-rate human being in the real world, but now he is facing 2 high-level audiences. It is like a little fox meeting 2 old foxes. Hang the broom diagonally on the door at night and sleep with your head facing south, and you'll be fine." The peaked hat kindly reminded me. Thank you very much." Subai kept thanking him and sent the cap out of the house. Officer Su had left with his men and the village chief before. He probably disliked that his kennel was too small, so he had better go to the entrance of the village to find one. The meeting continued in the room at 1 o'clock. After closing the door and turning around, Subai said to the fat man who was still lying beside the bed, "It's not like there is no gain. At least the identity of our victim has been confirmed, and we should no longer be suspected for the time being." Yes, Subai's cowardly look when the ambulance hit him and the way the fat man was possessed by a ghost did clear a lot of suspicions. The peaked hat walked out of Subai's house and came to Sister Chu's side, saying, "Confirmed, there is nothing wrong with that fat man. There are no mana fluctuations on his body, and there are no traces of practicing jiazi." "Then they have no suspicion," Sister Chu said solemnly. "I don't know why you keep paying attention to them, Sister Qu. Isn't it too simple if these 2 gangsters are the murderers? What if the broadcast hits us with some illogical logic? Moreover, some of the recent actions of these 2 people are a bit strange. Although there is nothing wrong with them, it feels a bit strange. Maybe it was a bait for us to waste time at the beginning of the broadcast. That should be it. By the way, follow me to the supermarket." Supermarket. Every afternoon these days, 5 old men gather to play chess next to the flower garden at the entrance of the village. But today, an old man in white clothes didn't come, and he was the father of the female proprietress who died today. It is said that he fainted from crying. If Subai was standing nearby and heard this, he would immediately think of the old man who played chess with him. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 898. When they first entered the world of this story, although Subai and Fatty were a little cautious, they were generally satisfied. Although their strength was sealed, the centipede insects were dead but not stiff. This feeling, at first one successfully strangled the first target and reached a peak after killing 2 more targets the next day. But broadcasting does not seem to intend to let the story world continue so smoothly. It has begun to use its golden fingers to constantly change the pattern of the story world. In the past, the higher the level of the listener, the better the understanding of the radio and the story world. When the radio treated the listeners as game characters, why didn't the listeners regard this as their own life and death game? The more you play and the longer you play, the more you both get to know each other. But this time is different. This time is the first batch of story worlds since the broadcast went wrong. When the broadcast no longer has the main purpose requirements and just changes the rhythm of the story world purely for fun, some previous understandings and routines of the broadcast, If you continue to believe it, the end will undoubtedly be miserable. Fortunately, some of the things Subai and Fatty did before were done in a relaxed state of mind, but the finishing work was still completed perfectly. This can be regarded as an inherent instinct of the old fox, which also made those batch of it was a blessing in disguise that the audience didn't continue to focus on them. That night, Fatty slept on the bed, and Subai slept beside the bed. The next morning, he was awakened by a loud noise outside. Subai shook his head slightly, not sure what was going on outside. The fat man also woke up, with a look of nostalgia on his face. I haven't heard this familiar melody for a long time. Subai stood up, opened the door and took a look, and found that several villagers outside were playing suanas and gongs, and an older villager in Taoist robes was singing and dancing while waving a sword. The familiar melody mentioned by the emotional fat man is this. Right. This is pretty much what Fatty used to do. It's pretty good now. Although these villagers are already panicking, they are still looking for ways to face it. They probably think that the village has been cursed by something, but in 2 days, the situation will change. Despair. It will swallow up the hearts of most people here. Once they find that no matter how hard they struggle and think of a way, they can't get out, and no one from the outside can come in, and this place becomes an isolated paradise, ethics, law, etc. will all lose their restraints. Human beings' minds will be completely filled with carpe diem and self-destruction, and by that time, the evil of human nature will completely burst out. The fat man also walked to Subai at this time and said, "Okay, just say one thing after another," Subai joked. "I've written a few movie reviews like this on Baihu before." The fat man raised his eyebrows. "How about it, isn't it good?" "How to sell our meat?" Subai asked. "Now seems not the right time. Let's leave it for now." Anyway, the broadcast didn't say the specific end time of the mission. This village should have a lot of food in stock, and there's unlikely to be any food shortage for a while. However, it's probably hard to replenish meat and non-staple food. How can we still sell meat? You have to make a careful calculation, and the most annoying thing is that there is no vegetable market in this village, not even a place dedicated to selling meat. Because this village is relatively close to the meat factory and is in the process of being renovated, the village does not have its own market. It only has a small supermarket and a hardware store and a fertilizer store where the villagers go shopping. If you take a battery car, you can go to the next town in about 10 minutes. The village suddenly became unable to leave. Last night, several villagers and nearby workers who did not believe in evil tried to leave. However, no one came back after leaving, and they could not be contacted outside. There was a construction site master who drove a forklift out. Yes, the forklift drove back by itself, and the people on the car were missing. Panic began to spread throughout the village like a virus, and no one dared to stay at home and wait. Faced with such weird things, various superstitious and feudal theories came out. Of course, there was another one. One theory is that American high-tech weapons or aliens have invaded here, etc. But for the Chinese people, they are still more inclined to think that the village is haunted, and this ghost is very powerful. It does not harm a person, but a village. Subai and Fatty walked around the village first. People everywhere looked panicked. The police were stationed at the entrance of the village, and their faces were not good looking. After all, they were not facing criminals, but an unknown. Peaked Hat was very close to Officer Su. The two were sitting in a police car and seemed to be talking about something. Yesterday, Peaked Hat solved the evil fat man, so in Officer Su's eyes, Peaked Hat should be a person in metaphysics. Naturally, people with unknown abilities must be used for such unknown things. This is enough to show how much pressure Officer Su is now. "The village is quite busy," the fat man muttered. "The undercurrent is turbulent." Subai looked at the fat man and said, "Actually, if we don't kill people, those people won't be able to stay quiet. they will probably take the initiative to attack. This is Sudbai's feeling, because neither the red short-sleeved woman nor the peaked cap are easy characters to get along with. If they are given enough time, they may have the opportunity to reach the stage of advanced listeners in the future. Sudbai, I don't believe that these people will sit there passively waiting for themselves and Fatty to attack. They should try to seize the initiative. Ah! A shrill scream came from an apartment building. Most of the houses in this village are bungalows or small two-story houses. There are 2 5-story apartment buildings at the entrance of the village, and there are several shop fronts on the ground floor. The screams came from the residents above the small supermarket. Officer Su, who was arguing with Peaked Hat, immediately got out of the police car when he heard the screams, and motioned to the 2 policemen around him to follow him up to check the situation. Peaked Hat took out a cigarette and sat leisurely in the passenger seat. Unlit. Hey, Dabai, this guy smokes better than you. What the Peaked Hat didn't know was that 2 people had been hiding in a corner and observing his current actions. They should be taking the initiative to kill the murderer. By the way, guess what the Peaked Cap was arguing with Officer Su just now? Sudbai asked. I guess he was trying to fool the police. His idea was to send as many people as possible out of the village to die. Fatty's guess coincided with Sudbai's. The thinking among the audience is actually very easy to understand, and compared to the group of experiencers, Fatty and Sudbai are the seniors in this field. In the eyes of the audience, other people in the story world are equivalent to NPCs and are not regarded as human beings at all. If they want to find the murderer among the people in this village, the best way is to let a group of villagers die. If the murderer is inside, their mission will be completed directly. If the murderer is not inside, then the remaining people will look for the murderer, and the murderer will have much less room to hide. It's like taking a sieve and starting to weed out wrong answers. Boom! The residence window suddenly spurted out a stream of flames, and then a burning figure jumped down from the window sill. After falling to the 2nd floor, he kept struggling, but because of the burning flames on his body, no one nearby dared to get close. By the time 2 villagers poured water on it to extinguish the flames, the guy was already lying on the ground lifeless. The Peaked Hat, who was still smoking leisurely, suddenly got out of the police car. There was an accident, Fatty muttered. That's the policeman, Sudbai said. Look at his clothes. The Peaked Hat ran upstairs on his own initiative. The flames came quickly and were extinguished quickly. Officer Su, who was covered in soot, and several other policemen carried down a body from above, and jumped down from the window sill. The policeman who was burned to death was just 2 corpses. Sudbai and Fatty just looked at the crowd of onlookers for a few moments. The other deceased was actually the little crew chief. The crew chief was not burned to death, he was killed with a sharp weapon. The fat man subconsciously reached out and tugged on Sudbai's clothes. Sudbai nodded knowingly, and the 2 of them immediately left the crowd and ran towards home. That group of listeners hit a brick wall, the fat man said in a deep voice as he walked. A sneer appeared on Sudbai's lips. The only person in this village who can stop the assassination of this group of listeners is the only one. It's a pity. It seems that guy ran away again. Otherwise, if that guy dies, we will have less of a threat. Yes, it was originally a killing game where everyone was equal. There were fewer people on Fatty Sudbai's side in the dark, and more people on his side in the open. It was considered a balance for everyone. In the end, a guy who knew magic appeared unexpectedly. This was almost bug that destroys the balance of the game. That woman is not simple. She was able to find out that guy's identity. This is something that none of us discovered, Sudbai said seriously. I told you it wasn't simple. Didn't she almost find out about your problem yesterday? The 2 of them kept walking home, very fast. When he was approaching the door of the house, the fat man suddenly asked Sudbai, it seems that the guy was not caught. Where do you think he is? Come on, he asked this question even after he came home. He was stabbed several times by me and attacked once by the gang. Now the only place he can choose to go to is. Subai unlocked the lock and pushed open the living room door. Sitting on the chair next to the table in the living room was an old man covered in blood. The old man looked pale and seemed to be dying, but he still stared at Subai and the fat man who returned home with hawk-like eyes. This is the place where he used to refine corpse puppets. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 899. The old man's eyes focused on Subai, with a hint of scrutiny. Actually, what surprises me the most is that your chess skills are so good. Subai shrugged. In fact, any chess activity cannot escape the word calculation in the final analysis. With Subai's mind and experience condensed on a chessboard, it would indeed feel like bullying. Even though this old man may be obsessed with chess, even though this old man is an extraordinary person with a story, his extraordinariness seems a bit too ordinary compared to Subai. I'm injured, I can only come here, the old man coughed, his face paler than before, but the sinister meaning in his eyes was stronger than before. He was like a bad wolf. The closer he was to his death, the more clear and exposed his unwillingness and anger became. He was unwilling to die like this, even though death is inevitable for ordinary people in this world. But he does not feel that he is an ordinary person. This feeling is well understood by the audience. In fact, the higher the audience climbs, the more afraid they are of death, because they have seen different scenery from a high place and slowly regard themselves as gods. Naturally, you don't want to die like ordinary people. Therefore, after you have basically reached the level of senior listeners, the story world arranged by the radio rarely threatens you with the simplest death, but gives you a sweet date and a chance to become stronger. Opportunity, but it is very dangerous on the way to this opportunity. It induces you to take the initiative to touch the danger in order to become stronger. It is no longer like the experiencer and ordinary audience who pick up the death threat whip to beat you. Hey, look at what you said, you can live here with peace of mind, and we will help you treat him. Don't you look at the monk's face to look at the Buddha's face. The fat man seemed familiar with himself and took the initiative to move forward. But the old man's eyes suddenly condensed at this moment. I can feel your murderous intent. The old man stared at the fat man and said seriously. It hurts your lungs. You can really see a ghost because you can feel my murderous aura. Look at my innocent little eyes. What you should see is deep care. I respect the old and love the young. The fat man continued to fight, haha. At this point, if the murderous intention could not be controlled freely, then the fat man could really find a piece of tofu and hit him to death. You saw me, but you didn't have murderous intent. Aren't you being too deliberate? The old man asked. Then, he stretched out his hand. In his skinny and blood-stained palm, there was a black soul struggling. He said, he has been entrenched in your home, but if you don't deal with it, sooner or later he will bite you back. This dead soul is naturally the unlucky guy who was strangled to death by the fat man earlier. Ha, cheating! The fat man gave the old man a thumbs up, then sat down cross-legged in front of the old man, looked at the old man, and said, Old man, you now know the situation, they want to kill you, in fact, we also want to kill you. To tell you the truth, we are two strange ghosts suppressed on Mission Mountain. We finally escaped from prison on Mission Mountain and were chased by several Taoist priests on Mission Mountain. We happened to encounter the ghost you refined. There were two corpse puppets, so I simply entered the physical body and borrowed it. If we can work together to get through this matter this time, your benefits and your evil methods will be indispensable in the end. I really despise you, fatty. As he said that, the fat man threw a piece of talisman paper in his pocket to the old man. The old man grabbed it with his other hand and looked at the talisman paper carefully. Fat master, I can't use magic power now, but you should have some discernment. This talisman paper was not drawn with magic power, but it is definitely a grade higher than what you have come into contact with before. So, put away your arrogance and wariness, either you choose to be killed by the two of us at this time, or you choose to get together with us, and the three of us will get through this together, just treat it as a settlement. After our own calamity, I will teach you some other methods, even the true Taoist teachings. It will definitely be much better than you living alone in this rural place playing with the living dead. Anyway, Fatty's mouth can deceive people, and he can do so very well. The old man seemed to be interested, but still asked, the village is now closed. Is it because of mission's formation? I can't say that. Anyway, we can't go out now, but I know how to get out. The fat man continued to fool around. Explain. Kill all the people who tried to kill you today, and this village will be restored to its original state. The old man said oh and smiled. In the end, I still want to kill someone with a borrowed knife. Subai, who had been standing aside without speaking much, seemed to suddenly think of something at this moment. He turned his head slightly and looked out the window. The scene just now appeared in his mind, that is, the peaked cap was still sitting in the police car. He was smoking a cigarette leisurely. One of the dead people was a policeman and the other was a crew-cut guy who looked like a half bucket of water. The other party wanted to kill the old man, but he really didn't use all his strength. The woman in red short sleeves, but never saw it. Suddenly, Subai clenched his fists and shouted. Fat man, please let us know. The fat man who was still chatting nonsense with the old man was also stunned. The old man was also a little confused. The fat man immediately slapped his forehead and said with a change of expression to the old man, you have tricked me. Several figures climbed over the fence at this time and entered directly into the yard of Subai's house. They were Sister Chu, a peaked hat, and another short-haired female audience member wearing jeans. These three people were actually when Subai observed the three people who had the calmest expressions when they got off the car. To put it simply, these three people were obviously a level higher than the other listeners in this group. The rest of the listeners may die in this story world or the next and become cannon fodder. However, they have the opportunity to impact senior people or even higher level people. Of course, this was the case in the past, but now broadcasting is purely I'm trying to commit chronic suicide, which is probably very suspenseful. We're at this house again. The peaked hat smiled in confusion. Sister Chu, I really admire women's sixth sense now. It's not a sixth sense, but haven't you noticed some coincidences? Sister Chu said very seriously, these two people are too much like gangsters. Every move, even the expression, even the cuts when speaking, are all, no different than a gangster. So, the reason why you doubt them is that they are too perfect, the woman in jeans asked. Almost Sister Chu smiled. In fact, there were some things she didn't say because she thought it was a bit ridiculous. When facing the two gangsters, she had a vague feeling of fear of meeting her seniors, but why maybe? Akui, you guard the back door, while Lao Chen and I attack the front door, Sister Chu arranged. Okay. The woman in jeans, who was called Akui, immediately went around to the back, and the peaked hat took out a polished leather belt from his pocket. The mountain-moving Taoist was not a Taoist priest in the ordinary sense, but one who specialized in walking wild roads. Warlocks are even a bit like gangsters in the world of tomb robbers. They also like to call friends when robbing tombs. They may not be very good at Taoism, but their skills in fighting are by no means limited. Sister Chu slowly raised her hand, holding a gun in her hand. The peaked hat looked at the gun in Sister Chu's hand. He knew that the gun was stolen because of Xiao Pingtu's death. Moreover, he felt that using guns in this story world was a bit boring. Sister Chu winked at Ye Bin Hat, who rushed over and kicked the door open. There was only a clang sound, and the wooden door, which was not strong in the first place, was knocked open at this time. Sister Chu aimed her gun at the inside, only to find that the living room was completely empty. At this moment, Akui, who was guarding the back door, also came in from behind and joined Sister Chu and Peaked Hat in the living room. Sister Chu turned around and went to the bedroom on the west side, while Cap went to the bedroom on the east side to check, but both bedrooms were empty. Their response was much faster than we expected, Akui said helplessly. The peaked hat walked to the chair in the living room, stretched out his hand and touched it gently. The blood stains haven't dried yet, so they probably left not long ago. Although we made preparations, it still took some time to track the old guy, but their reaction speed was really beyond our expectations. Sister Chu's face was slightly gloomy, but she still said, "It's not that there is no gain at all. At least we know that the murderer is probably not just the old man. They were originally in the dark, but now they are in the open. Now go back and call the other two people. Since we have forced the murderer to come out in the open, we must prepare to kill them. Damn it, are we just exposed like this with no technical content at all?" In the house by the river where Subai and Fatty had dismembered the body, Fatty looked like he had seen a ghost. The grandson who has been hiding and pretending for so long, building walls and digging up corpses, exposed himself so inexplicably, damn it. The plan can't keep up with the changes, Subai said as he looked at the old man. The transfer speed was indeed faster. The fat man carried the old man on his back, but the bumps along the way made him really afraid that the old man would suddenly gag. That's really a big loss. The old man raised his head with great difficulty, looked around, and then a wry smile appeared on his face. Those people have a very clear plan. You are too stupid. If you had any brains, you should have known not to run to our house. The fat man scolded. He did it on purpose, Subai suddenly said. At this time, he knew in his heart that if he didn't run to us, he would face the pursuit of the two of us and that group of people, but he went. Once we run away, it will force us to be exposed. If we don't want to gain nothing after being exposed, we can only keep him in the hope of getting some use value from him. Hearing this, the old man closed his eyes, but a smile appeared on his lips. Subai and Fatty walked out of the small house, sat by the door, and each lit a cigarette. Dabai, what should we do next? I'm afraid that the human flesh in our house will be found. We hid it well, and it's unlikely that we would be found out. However, I really feel that this time it may be a failed game for the broadcaster, because he wanted to purely pursue the story, and after playing cheats everywhere, the development of the plot turned out to be, at this point, without the support of the main line, its story world is indeed not as sophisticated as before. Until now, we only have one way left. Subai put out the cigarette butt on his fingertips and said in a deep voice. Every fish is dead and the net is broken. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 900. There were 5 audience members sitting together. The leader was naturally Sister Chu, who was napping in her peaked cap. Atui looked a little bored. The other 2 audience members, who were on the same level as Xiao Pingtu, looked a little frightened. In fact, for real desperados, what they fear most is the unknown, rather than tangible threats. But for rookies, unknown crises can make them nervous, but they can also give them the illusion that they can get away with it and that misfortune will not befall them. Once the danger is discovered and needs to be faced, they will feel real fear. Sister Chu, can't we tell that Officer Su? There were 2 rookies, one named Sun Zheng and the other named Wu Liang. It was Wu Liang who asked questions at this time. Huh. The peaked cap seemed to have woken up and said directly, are you stupid? What time has it been? The police still have time to deal with your murder case? If the radio didn't isolate the village, maybe we can use the power of the police, but now, it is basically impossible. Those police officers themselves are also very frightened and have no time to deal with you. Sister Chu ignored Wu Liang's suggestion. In her opinion, the peaked hat had already explained it very clearly. The village is actually very big, including the forest on the west side and a river. The scope of the village includes the residential area and a large area of nearby suburbs. Now there are only 5 of us, and there are probably 3 on the opposite side, and one of them people are likely to be capable of sorcery, and although that guy's life is in danger, we must not underestimate him. Next, we need to discuss what regulations should be used to face them. What's the point of discussing? Find them and kill them, the peaked hat sneered. They are already mice without holes, so what do they need to be afraid of? Then can you find them? Sister Chu asked. The peaked cap stopped talking. My suggestion is that none of us should go out now, and try to stay in this house as much as possible, so as not to give our opponents a chance to sneak attack. Sister Chu expressed her suggestion. Except for the peaked hat, which was a little disdainful, no one else expressed any objection, and soon the brief meeting was over. In the small hall, only Sister Chu and the peaked hat remained. What are you afraid of? The peaked cap asked with some confusion. I really felt your fear today. We forced the mouse out, but you started to be afraid. Because after I confirmed that those 2 people were the murderers, I had an uneasy feeling. You haven't really been in contact. I have been in contact with him. When that fat man was possessed by an evil spirit, I helped him get rid of it, the peaked hat said. What if that's a trick? Sister Chu asked, deliberately using the ghost to get close to us and offset our defensiveness. The peaked cap curled his lips and said in disbelief, that's not true. No. They are murderers. At least they have a deep connection with the old man. Otherwise, the old man would not have gone to their house when he escaped. And it is obvious that they ran away with the old man. Therefore, all their actions before our eyes, they are all fake and have a special purpose. Remember the guy in front of the ambulance who would rather huddle there than run away? Who was he performing for? Sister Chu asked. Just 2 ordinary people with thoughtful minds. In fact, if the old man hadn't been exposed, and they were also exposed, we would have given up our suspicion on the 2 of them, wouldn't we? Sister Chu asked. Okay, you have the final say. The peaked hat stood up and was about to go back to his room, but when he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and said, hey, actually you didn't answer my question. The peaked cap then smiled again and left the room as if he didn't intend to ask any further questions. Sister Chu gently rubbed her knuckles on the table. Yes, of course she knew what the peaked cap meant, because she herself was very surprised by her reaction. As if the opponent he faced was not an NPC designed by the broadcast, but an incredibly experienced audience. But how is this possible? When he hurriedly escaped from the house, the fat man also brought some things with him. Of course he couldn't bring out the pickled human flesh, but some black dog blood talisman materials and other things. The fat man took a lot of these things with him. He wanted to. It took a lot of effort to prepare these things, so of course I had to bring them with me. At least for now, this small house by the river is relatively safe. Subai and Fatty don't think the other party will continue to search after a missed attempt. They have already lost 4 people. If they try again, if they go out rashly and are counterattacked by the 2 of them and lose 1 or 2 men, the situation and the balance of strength will be reversed. The old man's vitality is very tenacious, and is even recovering at a better rate every hour, and some energy and blood gradually appear on his face. Subai thought that it was the old man who had sucked his own daughter's essence that caused the supermarket proprietress' death. He had not had time to digest the stuff when he was attacked, but now that he had begun to digest it gradually, his physical condition naturally began to recover. This old man was also a ruthless character, but it was a pity that he made 2 wrong moves with 2 groups of listeners. First, he was hit and severely injured by himself when he sneaked into his home, and then he was hit by another wave of young migrant workers from the village who had just returned from Foxconn. Audience saw through the identity and made another sneak attack. There is a saying on the football field that it is not a shame to lose to the world wave and score goals, so for this old man to stumble on the audience continuously, as an ordinary person, it is not a shame. On the contrary, he being able to save one's life so far is already considered very good. To ordinary people, the audience is considered to be a creature from another dimension, even to a practitioner of evil arts. Come on, help me draw the talisman. Seeing that the old man had recovered a little, the fat man asked him to help him get something. He had no power now and couldn't use many skills, so he had to use the old man as a coolie. The old man was quite happy. He probably felt happy to steal from his master. At least the concepts and ideas that Fatty came up with were equivalent to opening the door to another world for him. As for whether the old man had other thoughts in his heart, and whether he would feel at ease when holding a knife in his hands, Subai and Fatty were also on guard. After watching for a while, Subai walked out of the small house again, looked around, and found that there was no cigarette on him. The fat man came out now and threw his half-pack of cigarettes to Subai. Subai smiled, lit one, and lit one for the fat man. "What's wrong, Dabai? I feel like you're very sentimental." "Let me tell you, if we can be optimistic and positive, we still have a high probability of winning the final victory in this story world. Even if it's really a dead end in the end, at least we still have something. More than 50% is a good deal, right? Why are you in such a depressed mood? Haven't we found our little guy? Although he is locked up in an orphanage, it at least proves that he is still alive, right? After gritting your teeth and fighting for so long, persisting for so long, you finally have a choice. Why is your energy losing more and more?" Subai shook his head, indicating that this was not what he was thinking about. "Then what are you thinking about?" The fat man sat down next to Subai. "Is it appropriate to leave him alone after you come out?" Subai asked. The fat man took out a new piece of talisman paper that he had just drawn and said, "I didn't tell him the method of activating it." How could the fat man not have any idea about this trivial matter? Yes, Subai nodded. "No, Dabai, what are you worried about?" The fat man couldn't understand. It was Subai who said he was ready to fight to the death, but now it's him who is hesitant. Subai took out a piece of white paper. This was the task paper. Fatty also had one. Eyeball soaking in wine 1/2 selling meat 0/8. Fat man, what did I say before? You said you wanted to kill the fish and defeat the net, the fat man said. Before, I said that broadcasts seemed to be because without the main mission and the mode and purpose of raising goo, its plot and setting began to become fragmented. Yes, you said that this is normal, isn't it? It's not like the broadcast has never had problems before, and there has been a big change recently because of your parents and that Alexander the Great. No, Fatty Subai pursed his lips. I thought about it carefully, and something seemed wrong. This plot really collapsed because of its suspenseful atmosphere, which is similar to a killing game or Sun Hunglay's version of Insidious. The feeling has long since collapsed. But what if the real point of interest in broadcasting is something else? What exactly are you trying to say? Next, when you kill them, try to keep the bodies as good as possible, Subai said. Soak the eyeballs in wine. I have finished half of it. They are the eyeballs of the 3 guys we killed. I need 3 more. The degree of completion of soaking the wine with double listener's eyeballs is okay. But in terms of meat, there has never been a definite figure, because mine is the quantity sold, and yours is the money sold. The money you sell is actually better than me. You can buy and sell by force, or you can fool it into Tang monk meat. It is not impossible for you to sell even half a caddy of meat for 10,000 yuan, but what I have here is the quantity sold. This quantity is said to be 0/8, but I don't know what quantity it is measured by. Tell the important point, Fatty urged. Because Hukai's body turned into a zombie, I gave up his meat, because his meat was definitely not up to par, so it didn't count. In the end, I only took the eyeballs, Zhang Hong's meat, and the meat of the guy you strangled to death. I took them all, marinated them all, and disposed of their bodies. But since sales haven't started yet, it's not clear how this 0/8 amount is measured. Therefore, when I kill the audience next, try not to damage their corpses, and make it easier for me to remove the meat. The little flathead was burned to death, and the meat on his body is probably useless. You mean, in the end, after we successfully kill them, when you sell the meat, even if you give us every penny at a fire sale, you will probably not be able to complete the task in the end. Subai nodded. Then in the end, those who can kill and get their flesh. The fat man pointed at his face with his finger. Is this what the radio wants to do? If this is the fun that the broadcast wants to see, it seems to be really normal. Subai licked his lips. After all, from the perspective of the two of us, those guys who are just experiencers, even the supporting roles can't even be counted, they can only be counted as extras. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 901. There is a rule in the story world, and this rule actually applies no matter in the past or now, that is, you can never be completely prepared in the story world. This is not an ordinary strategy game, it is a computer game. No matter how high the AI is, it has its limitations. You can't hide in your own castle, work hard to farm and fight with troops, and then push the AI past. There is a hand of God, which will appear and fiddle with you when you want to prepare well to increase your success rate, so that you will never be 100% perfect no matter what you face in the story world. Therefore, it only takes 2 days to rest and recuperate. In these 2 days, we have to add the day of escaping, so it only takes 1.5 days. The injuries on Fatty and Subai have not healed yet, but the two of them have also recovered. Not planning to wait any longer, they took the old man who had recovered a little, and the three of them sneaked back into the house where the old man lived before. The living room was completely destroyed and the walls were burnt black, but the 2 bedrooms were still well preserved. After the 3 of them settled down, the old man started doing it at the urging of the fat man. The quilt that had pestered the fat man several times at the beginning, the strangled resentful soul, became the first raw material, and was turned into a ghost puppet by the old man's evil method. Because this ghost puppet had no causal relationship with the audience, the impact was not very great. At most, it was just a ghost puppet. The audience felt dizzy and sleepy, which was considered as the starting point of the fight. At the beginning of the fight, they threw a circle of buffs to the opponent that reduced their status. The old man thought that his work was over. Although he had regained his breath, he still did not have the ability to fight at close range with a knife after suffering heavy injuries one after another. However, the fat man urged him to draw 2 more bloods. Talisman, that peaked cap obviously has some special means. It would be safer for Fatty and Subai to share a blood talisman. After doing this, the old man's face turned pale again, and he lay on the bed alone and was very angry, but he would not die. In fact, from the perspective of the fat man, he would not be able to squeeze this guy until he was dying. Don't worry and go directly with Subai to kill people. God knows if this old guy will do something behind his back again. Fatty had done this kind of smiling tiger stabbing in the back a lot, so naturally he couldn't let the old man have the opportunity to do this to him. In the living room, Subai and Fatty were sitting upright. They didn't chat or laugh. They just sat quietly. Both of them were regulating their energy. These 2 bodies were the bodies of ordinary people, but now we can only try our best to adjust its status to the end to cope with the next fish death situation. After Subai's guess, Fatty and Subai actually felt a little heavy in their hearts. If in the end they tried their best and finally won, but found that there was not enough meat, then the final outcome would be to choose one of the 2. Is what the 2 of them least want to face. Subai and Fatty actually had the idea of guns. Of course they looked down on pistols before, but now a gun is much more useful than a knife barrel, but the remaining policemen, all of them, were camping at the entrance of the village to be on guard. The vigilance was several levels higher than before. Such a force was now unshakable by Sudbai or the audience. It was like something in a game. A group of NPC wild monsters who are obviously stronger than the players are entrenched there, and the tiger's butt and buttocks cannot be touched. The ghost puppet floated back, and the fat man took out a psychic talisman and formed a connection with the refined ghost puppet. Dabai, let's go, the location is confirmed. Everything. Here we go. Sun Zheng suddenly felt a little sleepy. Naturally, his rest in the past few days would not be very good. In other words, he had never had a good rest since entering this story world. After all, he had a partner on the first night when he entered the story world. He died, and then 2 more died during the day the next day. The onset of death came so quickly that it instantly made his nerves tense. Even now, the depressing feeling of an approaching storm is still there. The ground tortured him. Snapped. A Kui, who was sitting opposite him, slapped him in the face. Sun Zheng was shocked and felt that half of his face seemed to have lost consciousness at this moment. He did not dare to express any dissatisfaction with the Kui and could only lower his head. Head. You were drooling just now, a Kui said with some disdain. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together, and if it weren't for the fact that the opposition between the audience and the murderer in the story world was not too obvious this time, she, a Kui, would be the only one. I don't want to stay vigil with this mediocre person. This is a second-floor residential building. It is Sister Chu's home. Sister Chu's parents live in a room on the first floor, while Akui and Sun Zheng are sitting in the corridor on the second floor, and the other 3 people are rest in the room. Cap and Wu Liang sleep in the same room, while Sister Chu sleeps in a room by herself. In fact, Akui felt a little bit like a Cap. She felt that it was better for her and others to take the initiative. Even if there might be an accident that would lead to casualties and fall into passivity, it was better than positioning herself as a leader from the beginning. It is better to put the defensive position directly into the passive position. Suddenly, Akui suddenly felt that she was also a little sleepy. She immediately bit the tip of her tongue and became alert. Wrong. It makes no sense. Akui stood up, looked around, and shook the bell in his hand. The crisp sound of bells rang in the room, and Yetung and Wu Liang immediately rushed out of the bedroom door and ran over. Sister Chu, who was on the bed, also heard the ringing of the bell. Her first reaction was to hold the gun under the pillow in her hand. Before she could sit up, a black shadow approached quietly. Bang! 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 3 consecutive shots. Although the muzzle of the gun with the homemade silencer did not make that kind of crisp sound, it was enough for people within the house to hear. At this moment, Sudbai and Fatty, who were lying on the outer wall of the second floor, quickly looked at each other. Both sides understood the meaning from each other's eyes through the moonlight. There's a gun. The fat man was now sweating on his back. If Sudbai hadn't insisted on using the ghost puppet to test it first, he would probably have been shot 3 times in a row. Although his body also had a lot of meat, no matter how much fat he had, you would let it go. It's good for keeping warm, but it's not bulletproof. At this time, Sudbai and Fatty both had talisman stickers on their foreheads and chests. This was the escape talisman that Fatty asked the old man to draw for him. Sticking it on his body could block other people's perceptions, similar to the kind of sixth sense that can be blurred. It's not as exaggerated as to be invisible, but now 2 people can climb onto the wall. The 5 listeners in the room have no idea that it is the credit of this talisman paper. Kui's bell summoned Cap and the others, but then the gunfire in her sister's house attracted everyone again. Kui had no revenge on these people, so the impact was not very big. In the beginning, the reason why he could almost strangle Fatty to death was because Fatty had killed him like this before. The peaked hat rushed into Sister Chu's room. When he saw the ghost figure entrenched there, he immediately cut his palm open with a dagger, and then rushed over. The ghost puppet that was originally virtual actually became a real entity in front of the peaked hat and was thrown to the ground by him. Then the peaked hat muttered something in his mouth, and an iron plate appeared in his hand and pressed directly on the ghost puppet. Hiss, hiss. Similar to the sound of a frying pan, most of the ghost puppets dissipated, and the rest turned into broken black smoke and drifted out. If Fatty was standing here and saw this scene, he would definitely be able to tell that this iron sign is actually an inherited object of the Taoist lineage of Banshan, the Ghost Gate sign. The captain who touches gold has the golden talisman, the general of Fakaiu Zhonglang has the seal of Fakaiu, the Taoist priest of Banshan has the Ghost Gate sign, and the warrior of Xiling has the Red Eyebrow Festival. They are all sacred objects passed down by their respective lineages. This kind of thing, I don't know how many times I have encountered serious evil in the cemetery, and I don't know how many generations of tomb robbers have been attached to the souls. Naturally, they have been impregnated with a layer of evil spirit. They have the grade of a low-level magic weapon, but they do not have the ability to actively use it. The effect is just. Broadcasting's attitude towards this group of experiencers was indeed better than Sudbai's, and they actually let the peaked hat come in with this object. Okay, it's okay. Half of that thing's soul was knocked out. It won't take long for him to be gone. The peaked hat hesitated for a moment, but still didn't tell everyone the true identity of the soul, because it would be useless if he told it. It will make those two rookies even more timid. I'll go keep vigil. Sister Chu signaled Akui and Sun Zheng to rest. Akui, please rest with Sun Zheng. Sister Chu and I will go to watch the night. They just sent a kid to test it out tonight. It should be fine. Akui nodded in agreement. Just like that, Sister Chu and Cap went to the corridor, Wu Liang and Sun Zheng went to another room, and Akui slept in Sister Chu's previous room. However, Akui just sat down by the bed. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and then the door was pushed open. This is a sign of acquaintance. Knock first and then push open. The door is unlocked. On the one hand, it is convenient to enter and exit. On the other hand, it is also because there is your night watchman on the corridor, and the murderer will drive the kid. The meaning of locking the door, it's not big, but it will cause inconvenience to yourself. This also made Akui not be alert from the beginning, but then, a fat shadow suddenly rushed towards her. At this moment, Akui's eyes condensed. She really didn't expect it. When the murderer came to kill her, he actually chose to knock on the door first. But Akui's instinctive reaction was still there. She first stretched out her hand to block the opponent's arm and intercepted the opponent's thrust. Then she twisted her waist violently and kicked the fat man to the ground with a sweeping kick. But the next scene showed a look of horror on Akui's face. A gun suddenly appeared in the fat man's hand and was pointed at her. The hairs on Akui's body stood up instantly, and she subconsciously rushed out of the door. However, just as she rushed out of the bedroom door, a figure who had been waiting for a long time appeared. Sudbai's switchblade was directly stabbed in the face. It entered Akui's chest. In fact, it was Sudbai Chi who had entered Akui's chest, rather it was Akui who took the initiative to hit it. At the same time, Sudbai used his strength to stir things up. He believed that Akui was definitely dead this time. Oh, that's a toy gun. Sudbai's face was very close to Atui's face. Sorry everyone, Dragon overslept today. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 902. In fact, in the eyes of Sudbai and Fatty, this group of people seemed a bit immature even if they gathered together to calm down. For example, they actually slept in separate rooms. This also gave Sudbai and Fatty the opportunity to defeat each other separately. Even if they are very close to each other, as long as they are not in the same space, it is not difficult to seize an opportunity to kill someone quickly in an instant. Of course, This is also because although their combination is all experiencers, they also have absolute strengths and weaknesses, so this team is not balanced. A team composed of some guys who think they are awesome and some rookies will definitely have a variety of, for example, at the beginning, Hukai and Zhonghong couldn't help but run out to find the murderer. Then by luck, they found the murderer and foolishly rushed over to try to steal the reward. Hukai deliberately tricked Zhang to death because of this. Red. They have many people, but there are too many pig teammates inside. Of course, if everyone has an ordinary body, and the radio replaces these experiencers with senior listeners, then Subai and Fatty basically have no chance of winning. Just now, Subai and Fatty hesitated together, whether to go into Sun Zheng and Wu Liang's room to kill the two rookies or to kill Akui alone. The latter was definitely more difficult than the two rookies, even though there was only one person. But in the end, Subai and Fatty unanimously chose the latter. Let's keep the two rookies for now. It would be most beneficial to deal with a character who seems difficult to deal with first. Subai could feel the heat of the blood on Akui's body gushing out on his arm, but in the next moment Subai immediately pulled out the knife and pushed Akui aside. The fat man inside was still holding his chest and panting. He was seriously injured by Akui's kick in the leg. If he hadn't been carrying a stolen toy pistol, the fat man might have had to confess just now. This is a dead end. Both sides have a chance, and anyone can finish the game. Both sides are wandering between life and death. 7 points depends on strength, 3 points depends on luck. Everyone is gambling on their lives. Subai rushed into the house and directly pulled up the fat man. The fat man went out through the window first. When Subai was about to go out, he found a figure coming behind him. It was actually a peaked hat. This guy was really fast. He saw Subai jumped out and grabbed Subai's ankle without saying a word. This guy's technique made Subai very uncomfortable. Although he was an ordinary person now, one of Subai's two major bloodlines was zombies. Every move the opponent made was a way to restrain zombies, which made Subai feel deep in his heart. Feeling instinctively repelled and disgusted, Subai's body sank immediately, and he kicked him with his other foot. The other party simply jumped up and jumped downstairs with Subai. The fat man who had just climbed out of the window and was standing on the edge of the window was shocked when he saw Subai falling down with his peaked cap. Then, the fat man saw Sun Zheng's face sticking out of the window, as if to inquire about the two people who had just fallen. Situation, but I didn't see anyone standing on the side of the window. The fat man didn't care anymore, he rushed over and held Sun Zheng's neck with both hands, pulling him down with him. Click. In fact, the two-story building in the countryside is not very high, but Sun Zheng was carried down by the fat man's neck. When he landed, his upper body landed sideways. The fat man only felt the neck held by his hands make a crisp sound. As soon as there was a sound, the opponent kicked his legs and went straight to GG. This kind of guy is purely used as the denominator and cannon fodder. In Fatty's view, whether it is Akui or this guy who just fought, they are incomparable to the Hukai who almost killed him in the beginning. A pure practitioner. When a child or martial artist is at the level of an experiencer, he has simply the thickest thighs, but unfortunately those thighs are stubborn and only believe that there is only one murderer who was killed by Dabai's sneak attack. Of course, Bimax didn't realize that he was so skilled until he became an ordinary person together. Over there, Subai and the peaked hat landed together. Because Subai was holding his legs by the opponent, he landed on his back first. His whole chest suddenly felt tight, and he had a tendency to faint, but Subai still stood up. Come on, Subai has been a vampire for a long time, so Subai has a great ability to accept the degree of damage to the body. This is actually equivalent to a psychological suggestion for ordinary people. The principle is the same as when a farmer's uncle found that his son driving a truck had overturned and was pinned underneath, and he actually turned the truck over by himself. Of course, Not many people may know that the farmer's uncle died not long after that. That kind of force, the practice of relying on psychological suggestions to stimulate physical potential, is more terrifying than the side effects of soldiers injecting themselves with stimulants during war. Athletes are actually able to unleash their potential to a greater extent than normal people. Of course, after athletes retire, their bodies will also have various problems caused by premature overdraft. But at this time, the peaked had already stood up with a dagger and was about to stab himself. If Sudbai continued to lie on the ground and hum twice, he would have said goodbye to his life. The next moment, one side of Sudbai's body, one leg, was stuck on the opponent's neck, and he was about to strangle the opponent to death with this scissor kick, but the duck cap also had rich experience in life and death fights. He immediately raised his body forward and directly bumped into Sudbai. He moved forward, and finally hit the back of Sudbai's head on a stone in the yard. Sudbai's back of the head had been injured and had a slight concussion. Now, the new injury involved the old injury, causing Sudbai's consciousness to fall into confusion at this moment, and even his vision began to become very blurry. The peaked cap pressed up again, but the fat man threw his body out at this time and hit the peaked cap. The fat man may not have good fighting skills, but he is a meat and egg chariot. The peaked cap is also similar to Sudbai. Even though his eyes were red, he was unprepared and was knocked 2 meters away by the fat man. Dabai, wake up, I can't sleep, I can't sleep. The fat man slapped Sudbai twice in the face, trying to wake him up, but the force was a little stronger. Sudbai woke up a little and stared at the fat man. This damn fat man was definitely trying to take revenge on himself for bringing up the black man's corpse. The fat man's face was red, but his heart was not beating. He took out an evil talisman and stuck it on Sudbai's forehead. Please get up. Before the fat man could finish his sentence, he let out a scream. At this moment, the peaked cap rushed up again like a mangy dog and cut the fat man's left arm with a knife. If the fat man hadn't sensed the murderous intention in advance, he would have moved a little. The location may be open and ruptured now. Sudbai felt a sudden gust of wind coming from all around him. At this moment, his body suddenly became much stiffer, but also became much stronger. The peaked cap was about to stab the fat man again, but he was almost trapped underneath. The unconscious Sudbai kicked him in the lower abdomen, and then Sudbai stood up directly, holding the opponent's knife-wielding wrist with one hand and pinching the opponent's neck with the other, and the two of them struggled on the ground. For ordinary people, martial arts moves are actually just the same thing. When practicing martial arts on a daily basis, the master teaches them a rigid routine, which seems quite unclear. However, looking at those famous martial arts competition videos, it is often when major sects or famous masters go to the ring to duel, they just greet each other with badass punches. Let alone martial arts movies, even the fight scenes in movies like Young and Dangerous are more enjoyable to watch than the fights between real martial arts masters. The reason is actually that practicing moves only instills a coping instinct in your body, but most of the time, directly using the king's 8 punches to see who is faster and who is more ruthless and who can't stand it first is often the key to victory. At this time, Sudbai didn't know if he was possessed by something, but fortunately, Fatty's evil talisman did work. At least he was not as embarrassed as Fatty was last time. If at this time, he suddenly pinched his throat and sang Susan, that's really a death with eyes open. The peaked cap is also very powerful, or in other words, everyone is able to spare no effort when a person is on the line between life and death. However, the two people fighting in a stalemate on the ground looked no different from the two shrews fighting on the ground. Before the fat man had time to look at the upper part of his left arm, a figure ran out from the bend in front of the house. It was Wu Liang. He also rushed over at this time. Although he came relatively late, fortunately he was not stupid. He knew whoever loses today will die. The fat man took a deep breath and took the initiative to bump into him. After being knocked over by a Kui's sweeping kick, the fat man understood a truth deeply. MMP, the advantage of the fat man is that he has such a big fat body. It's not Sammo Hung. Who is playing tricks with you? Puff. The knife in Wu Liang's hand pierced the fat man's abdomen, which made Wu Liang's eyes light up, but the fat man's fierceness was reflected here. Time and time again, in the story world and in the real world, the old fried dough sticks were better than those who experienced it. The outstanding points were revealed, and the fat man inhaled immediately, clamped the knife with the flesh on his belly, then held Wu Liang's head with both hands and hit the wall on one side. Bang! 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 After hitting Wu Liang's face for many times until his face was completely bloody, the fat man let go. Wu Liang, who had long since expired, fell to the ground. The fat man also sat down against the wall, his mouth wide open, but it was difficult to make a sound, and the constant blood loss in his abdomen and arms made him almost unconscious. He took out the talisman, but spit out another mouthful of blood. His palms lay slumped on the ground, and he could only watch helplessly. Dabai was still struggling with his peaked cap. The two men stood up after wrestling from the ground, but at this moment, the peaked hat suddenly grabbed Sudbai's arms with both hands. Sudbai kept hitting him with fists, but the other party ignored him. Then, a woman's figure slowly appeared. The ground came out from one side, she raised her arm and pointed the gun at it. Sudbai let out a low growl in his throat, and then he put one leg on the ground, threw his body weight hard, and forcibly changed his position with the peaked hat. Boom! Gun! It still rang. The bullet passed through the back of the peaked cap and passed through Sudbai's chest. Therefore, the kind of plot in TV dramas where the heroine suddenly rushes to block the bullet before the hero is shot is a bloody and stupid plot. During the anti-Japanese war, the Japanese often took the initiative to withdraw the 38-meter-high bullets and instead fight with the bayonet. On the one hand, it was because the Japanese were really good at bayonet fighting at that time, and on the other hand, they were afraid that if they fired in close combat, the bullets would penetrate the opponent and also hit their own people. Sudbai knelt down on the ground, and the peaked cap behind him slipped off his body and fell to the ground. Sister Chu slowly walked over and pointed the gun at the back of Sudbai's head. In the end, I won, are you right? Usually at times like this, if the villain talks too much, he will end up bad in the end. Haha, don't you know that many villains actually die because they talk too much? Sudbai covered his chest with one hand, and the talisman on his forehead also turned into fly ash and dissipated. Oh, thank you for the reminder. Boom! Sister Chu pulled the trigger. The fat man sitting under the corner suddenly shrank when he saw this scene. He saw a hole was punched in the back of Dabai's head, his brains were splattered, and his body tilted to the other side. This scene left Fatty in complete disbelief, so much so that his body, which was already in shock due to excessive blood loss, started to tremble at this moment. Don't worry, you will be next.